listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plimer. Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby. Sharing ideas to make the game better.
Welcome to episode 103 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plimer, and joining me today is James Kent. James is the technical analyst at France Rugby, as well as academy coach at Stade Français. He also has roles with Monaco Rugby Sevens and is the director of rugby at Rugby Club Luxembourg. And it's a pleasure to have him on the show. So welcome, James.
Thanks very much, Andy. I've been a keen listener for a number of years, so honoured to be on.
Sweet. No, great to have you on, and especially considering how France are faring at the moment. So looking forward to getting stuck into that kind of conversation. What about you're a bit of an internationalist, mate? You're half French, half Australian. Grew up in England, played in Spain. You're like an international man of mystery. What was your playing kind of time like in those early days?
My playing backstory. I wasn't an elite player by any means. I played a bit in the UK, whilst at school there, and then went over to Spain. I was playing in the Spanish comp. I did a pre-season at Richmond, and then ended up going to Spain, which turned out pretty well for me, playing for Alcobendas, and then tore my ACL pretty early on, age 21, which is when I started getting into coaching because I wanted to stay involved with the club. Came back from that, and then a few years later, fractured my tibia playing rugby league. So I, sort of bombarded with injuries early on, but I think, that also had a positive impact on my coaching.
Yeah, got you into the game earlier?
Yeah, no, definitely. I sort of went through the transition of being a player coach, which was obviously not an easy role. Yeah. Yeah, something I'd never do again if I could play. But I think it takes a really special person to be able to try and be a player coach.
And do it really well too.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, I suppose expect to have tough talks with guys who are your mates and who you play with, and then be out on the source with them the two nights before. It takes a talented negotiator and probably someone with quite high emotional intelligence.
Yeah, no, that was definitely my pitfall. The emotional intelligence was the big one. It's like, I'll get the results just by screaming at them. Was usually the default setting. It didn't take long to realize that's not at all effective.
I think that was my mistake earlier on as well, was coaching the way that I'd been coached, because that's what you relate to. So I think that was just a natural way to go about it. And I'd skippered the team as well for a couple of years. So I suppose that there was no real difference between coaching and captaincy for me at that point. In retrospect, obviously now I can see it, but at the time you just assumed that was the way it was done.
Yeah, that was one thing when I started as a player coach that I initially said, no, I can't be captain as well. Partly because I there's better options and, better players too. But just that extra mental kind of bandwidth that gets taken up from being the captain, it would have just been, pretty ugly at my end.
And you sort of see it through two different lenses as well, because if you're, caught up into the coaching world, then you fail to see what you're doing yourself. And then if you put your player glasses on, then it's impossible to see the bigger picture.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And apart from that aspect, what were some of the other big kind of takeaways from those early coaching days in Spain?
I'd say, well, definitely not be a player coach again. But I think being able to coach a variety of people, I think coaching in another language for me was a big learning occasion, because it forced me to communicate simpler terms, and probably try and get my message across a more blunt fashion, but
Mm.
I think that definitely helped my communication with players and not get my words muddled around and, stick to the point. So I think that was definitely a big learning experience. And then I suppose another learning experience I had a few years later on was in Canada when I wasn't sure whether I wanted to go down the coaching route entirely, and I was, going back and forth on the idea of maybe more in a management role, and it was actually Scotty Hansen, the current Crusaders coach, who was with Kieran Crowley on his staff. I was rooming with him, and I remember him just telling me, well, what are you more passionate about? Are you more passionate about coaching? Or are you more passionate about management? So that kind of stuck with me, as simple as it was. And I think that really flicked the switch, and that was quite a big learning for me at that time.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and one that you can you can lose that vision sometimes when you get bogged down. And what about after Spain? You mentioned Canada there. There was stop off for a few years in Canada as well, and now you're in Luxembourg. What's that journey been like in terms of coaching and the adventure?
It's been a bit of a domino effect. I couldn't have imagined that I would have stayed that long in Canada, and that I originally only went over for 3 months after having worked a week as a liaison officer for the Canada Sevens in Houston when I was living in New York. And I got back to New York and I was working at a startup company, and I realised that the cubicle life wasn't for me. I wanted to get back into rugby, and from there I reached out to Steve Lancaster, who was the high performance manager at the time, and asked him if there were any opportunities, I could have to apply for them. And 6 months later, I was landing in Victoria for what was meant to be 3 months. Basically a bit of an assistant, helping from an operations standpoint, learning about analysis, learning how to code. I was a jack of all trades. And then from that, they asked me if I was keen to go on the men's tour for the test matches against Scotland and Japan. And after that just sort of, again, trickled onto the Women's World Cup in 2014. So it was, it was great because I met some great coaches there, and I met guys like Francois Ratier, who I worked with in 2016 on the men's tour, and again 2017 the World Cup, and he had a big impact on my coaching. It was, I suppose, my eye into the coaching world, and I got, I suppose, more passionate about it as well. Working with guys like Kieran as well from the outside looking in for a while. It was Rugby Canada at that point had some really good coaches to learn from with a lot of experience on the sevens and the 15s front. So I think my passion grew with that. And then afterwards in 2017, when we finished the World Cup, my wife found a job in Luxembourg. So we moved over here, and from that, I ended up coaching, being assistant coach with the national team.
Yep.
Which was again a really good experience for me, because I'd come from Rugby Canada, tier 2 nation at the time, to Luxembourg, who were down the pecking order, probably 63rd in the rankings. And so for me, it was an eye opener, because we didn't have the same resources. We didn't have necessarily the same financial investments, or probably investments from athletes, and then didn't have the same depth. So that was a great experience to I suppose, adapt in my coaching style. I had to change it up and make it a little bit simpler, and probably simplify it again in order of, how we were going to conduct our season, and what patterns we could run, knowing that we didn't necessarily have the players that could do what I'd originally planned. You come in thinking, you can have a big impact with all these ideas, but you have to cross them out and just simplify it. That was my big learning when I arrived here.
Yeah, I've made that mistake too, where you go into a certain setting with this preconceived idea of they're going to be at this level, and then you get there and you realize, well, there's one or two at that level, but there's actually a bunch who are here, and then there are a bigger bunch who are down here as well. So that's a huge challenge, creating sessions that deliver something for all of that playing group.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I suppose even from an investment point of view, even though the women at the time in Canada were on a pay-to-play scheme, it was also amateur, and so it was interesting to have those comparisons, playing for the national team and the pride that Canadians have, for example, of donning the maple leaf, and here there's such a mix of expats. The team, we've probably 50% Luxembourg and 50% expats. So that made it interesting to see how do you work with the French, who have a certain way of being coached, and how do you work with the Anglophones, who have another way of being coached. That also made it quite the challenge.
Nice. Sounds fun. Yeah, cool. And somewhere along the line there in your time at Luxembourg, the academy coaching role popped up at Stade Français. How'd that start, and what is your kind of role, your day-to-day look like in that role?
So I came about, when I arrived, I was trying to look for a professional club around here and couldn't find any that were within a driving distance, reasonable driving distance. But I did find in Germany there was the World Academy, and they were about a 2-hour drive. And I reached out to them, and their coach at the time, Kobus Potgieter, a South African guy, invited me down to spend the day with them. And he actually then moved to Stade Français because the owner of Capri-Sun bought Stade Français, but he also owned this academy, a German guy, and took Kobus with him. And then about, I'd say 12 months later, Kobus told me they might be needing an analyst, almost a voluntary basis for the academy, and asked me if I was keen to do it. So it started off as an analysis gig, and then afterwards became more of a skills-based role. And so now, that was in 2019, and now it's pretty much I'd say 80% skills. So we work day to day. I'd say it'd be morning, we'll work with a lot of the CDF players, which are the Centre de Formation. So they are the academy guys who are on contract. And they are able to train and play with the pros. So if guys are on international duty or injuries, they're the ones that are able to play top 14 and Champions Cup. So do a lot of individual skills with them and reduced group skills work with them. And then in the afternoon, I'll work with the PCF, which is the Centre de Formation. So these are the guys who are wanting to get a contract in the next 12 to 18 months. So they'll be a year or two younger, but still looking to try and get a professional contract out of it. So that keeps me busy.
Yeah. So is that every day of the week, 3 days a week? How's that work?
So it's 3 days a week. So the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you then stay overnight and then come back on the Wednesday night back to Luxembourg, or do you commute every day?
No, Monday mornings I hop on the 5:59 a.m. train, and then shoots me into Paris about 8:20.
They couldn't make it 6, could they? They just had to be 5:59.
5:59, and then on the Wednesday afternoon I'm back, and then I'm straight into club coaching at Rugby Club Luxembourg on the Wednesday evenings.
Right. And that's so you got some spinning some plates there. How's
Oh, yeah.
how do you go, like, separating all those roles and making sure that you're doing a good job at all of them?
I think definitely spinning plates is probably right. I mean, trying to adapt to the players that you have. So the morning I'll be, working with guys who are in the academy, and then evening I'll be back in Luxembourg working with amateur players who, are keen on throwing around a ball and having a beer after. So it's almost having to take myself. I used to make the mistake of wanting to implement things that I've seen that week straight away into club, and that obviously doesn't work as well as you'd like. Like we mentioned before, it works with some players, but you have to go at the slowest rate of the probably one of the newest guys. So by progressing, I suppose, on a slower scale, using, reducing time, reducing space, that's a big help for me. I think not trying to do too much is also key, because we've only got 2 training sessions a week with the club. So the temptation is to try and bring in, more than we could chew off. But I think, being able to do that and bounce, it's taken me 2 years to really, I suppose, grasp it. It hasn't been easy, because I've had the French gig on the side as well, and the temptation, like I say, is to want to try and correct everything you see. I do rely heavily on the coaches that I coach with at the club, because we've got a good relationship. One of them, it was the head coach with the national team with me for Luxembourg, so we've got a good relationship, and he's not afraid to tell me, well, this might be a little bit out of their league, or this, and he'll bring me back down to earth on it. So I think it's important to surround yourself with people like that.
Yeah, that is really important to give you that feedback that maybe you've got the blinkers on, you've missed. Cool.
Tends to happen.
Yeah, to all of us.
Exactly.
And you had a bit of time with the French U20 team, which is cool. They are, the current senior squad. A lot of those players came out of that French team a few years ago, the U20 team, who were pretty sensational. What was that experience like? What was your role there?
So my role was a dual role. I was brought on as entraîneur vidéo, which translates to video coach. And so some of my responsibilities were to look at opposition analysis, do individual player analysis as well, work with players on individual basis, go over their games, and then also that started working more onto skills, so on the park, in extra sessions that we'd have, or working in the gym on some micro skills. So that was a really, really interesting time for me, because it was my first time being involved with a team of that higher standard. And again, I sort of looked at the bigger picture once I was in there, and I said, well, I've now been fortunate enough to, work with a tier 2 nation, tier 1 nation, tier 3 nation. And I think that also helped a lot, knowing, I suppose the luxuries that we had available to us, as far as, analysis equipment and things that we didn't necessarily have,
or just
before.
Equipment.
Or just equipment, just a few extra hit shields.
Yeah.
So I think that it was a really interesting role, and then that obviously opened a few doors for me. I met some coaches there, met people within the federation, and I suppose it was quite funny, because when I started at Stade Français 3 months before, and I sort of felt like I'd come full circle, because 2014, my first big experience, I suppose, with the Women's World Cup in Paris, and we were actually based at Marcoussis, which was now my place of work. But my other place of work was Stade Français' home ground, where we played our semi-final against France and played the final against England. So it was quite funny at that time, because it was all sort of flashbacks from previous years.
Well, just listening to your story, it sounds like making connections and networking has been a massive part of the journey. Would you agree with that?
100%.
Yeah.
I think you need to take risks and, pick up the phone or send a message on LinkedIn or email guys, because you never know who might help you open that door. They might open a door, they might give you some information that you might apply. And I think, the concept of sharing ideas, just when you had Wayne Smith on the pod, I know, and he's a big advocate of it. And I think his philosophy is totally on point, because it's the more open you are, the more ideas you'll get back, and the more help you'll receive as well. And I think in this line of work, you do need people to give you a helping hand, to give you a help, a leg up. And I think my whole journey the last 7-8 years has been down to connections and down to relationships. And I think working on your soft skills as a coach, not only with your players, but with your coaching staff, with the people that you meet, you never know what might happen. So, I 100% agree with it.
Yeah, no, cool. After that French role, you've now in your current role, one of your many current roles, one of the plates, or this is probably 2 or 3 plates, I'd say. Your current role is technical analyst for France Rugby. Talk to me a little bit about that and how epic that must have been to get that role initially.
Yeah, so it was a bit of a surprise because I was working with preparing the Six Nations for the U20s, which had been postponed last year to the summer. And 6 weeks before, I got tapped on the shoulder and asked if I was keen to go to Australia with a senior French team to play the Wallabies. And that was obviously surreal, being French Australian. And I don't think that I could have been better suited. But my role with that was looking at the Wallabies kicking game, specifically. So looking at that from a technical perspective, their main kickers, left foot, right foot, tendencies, ticks they might have, areas of the field that we can maybe exploit. I was working a lot with the kicking coach, Flock Sitters, as well, from a distance, because unfortunately he wasn't able to come. So that was great for me, because I also was able to look at a lot of the young Australian players which the French didn't necessarily know about, but having kept an eye on Super Rugby and Shoot Shield, and I do like to watch what goes on out there. So I suppose that also gave me an advantage in that point.
Yeah, well, I've always been a fan of French rugby. I think ever since I was in Wales for the '99 World Cup final, where gladly the Aussies won that one. But that French team was pretty incredible. They had Pierre Villepro as their assistant coach, and they were playing some amazing rugby. And then they went through a big stage where kind of bigger is better, and that French flair wasn't there anymore. And now it seems to be really back, especially not dismissing the defense, but in attack. I'm loving what they're doing. What have been some of the kind of key metrics from an analyst point of view that you're keeping track of in terms of the team's attack?
I think there's been a big emphasis on their work off the ball. I think that's something that didn't necessarily come naturally to French players, and I think now with the use of GPS and data, they've really hammered down that point. The fact that they can be a threat off the ball, be quick enough to be in a position to do something with the ball. So I think that kind of emphasis, and guys who are willing to work at high intensity, is they train at high intensity as well, and that shows on the field. I think that as well the kicking game has come on leaps and bounds. Culturally speaking, French rugby, if you kick the ball away, it's because you've run out of ideas, and you don't want to kick it. Sort of comes out as a last resort, culturally speaking. Their tens have been mainly guys who want to run the ball and jouer, to use the stereotype. But I think now they've become a real threat with their short kicking game, and they're also using their kicking game to regain possession in other parts of the field. And I think the new laws as well are helping that. So I think that'll, with the new laws coming in, having come in this season, I think they'll use that to their advantage as well, as will other teams.
Yeah, and I'm definitely seeing a lot more intent around offloading and getting in behind the defense, and quickness of ball at the breakdown. It's been awesome to watch. Yeah.
Their ruck speed is definitely as well improved on that front. And I suppose that also comes back to guys working off the ball to be in a position to secure it.
Yeah, cool. And if you were a club coach and you wanted to kind of look at working off the ball, how would you advise club coaches to do that in terms of like analysis without it being too burdensome?
I think just something as simple. If obviously you're not going to have the GPS units at every club, and I think just something as simple as showing them some images, showing them some video of guys. What are they doing once that ball's left the ruck? Guys on the blind side, are they realigning at pace? Are they in a position to catch the ball? Have they got their backs turned towards the defensive line? Who's coming around the corner? I think if you can probably pick guys who are doing it naturally and put the focus on that, put a positive spin on it, as opposed to the guys who are struggling to get around the corner or struggling to get themselves into position. But there's always guys that will be doing it. So I suppose is really trying to spot who those guys are and using them as examples and using them as your strength, and then just trying to get guys to buy into it.
Hi, coaches. Well, ever since announcing my goal to launch the Evolve online coaching course this year, I've had a few questions around the meaning of the name Evolve. Well, firstly, Evolve is an acronym based on the title for each module, and within those modules are chapters dealing with content around session delivery, team culture, how to improve attendance through the environment you create, the science of coaching, coach health, and many more. As well as this, Evolve is also a description of my personal experience and growth as a coach from running this podcast over 6 years. The changes in my coaching philosophy, methodologies, creativity, and weekly training cycle, among other things, have really been immeasurable. The catchphrase of the pod has always been sharing ideas to make the game better. And the game gets better when we as coaches get better. So that's my goal with Evolve. Provide an online course based on 100 plus interviews with some amazing coaches so that people can grow and develop at their own pace in the comfort of their own home. Stay tuned for more updates, but for now, kick back and enjoy this episode.
Obviously, you're part Australian, so working for France in Australia must have been a pretty crazy experience. What was that like, and how was the roller coaster ride?
Oh, mate, it was arriving at Sydney Airport in itself was a roller coaster. I was the only bloke holding an Australian passport to go into Australia wearing French gear.
Yeah,
so
you get to go to the special line. That's good.
With COVID and everything, it was a bit, we were all sort of thrust into one area like cattle. But when we checked in the airport into the hotel, we had to go in quarantine for 2 weeks. So the police were there checking us in. Sorry?
You grabbed the 2-4 of VB.
Yeah, if only we'd had time to stop. But the police had a good chuckle and they saw my passport, and I sort of had to communicate a few of the times with the translator. But no, it was awesome. I mean, it was something obviously that I hadn't imagined happening, even last year. So it was, and for me to go back to Sydney, even though we didn't actually play in Sydney because of COVID, and we ended up playing 2 tests in Brisbane and one in Melbourne. It was still a phenomenal experience to be able to I suppose be at that level, be surrounded by the players and coaches, and massive learning experience for me. Came back with a notebook, stacked with notes, and then at the same time, plotting the demise of a team that I'd always sort of grown up watching and supporting. And when we lost that first test, I'd never been that angry that the Wallabies had won. I'll put it that way. So there was some new emotions in there as well.
Yeah.
But I think working alongside Sean Edwards, he was great for me because being another English speaker, we had a lot of exchanges, and he knew I was interested in coaching and especially the defensive side of things. So he'd always challenge me as a coach. He'd get me to want to hear my thoughts on certain things, and so that was good for me because it kept me on my toes. And I suppose you're getting challenged by coaches like that. It's phenomenal learning experience.
Yeah, and he's a massive coup for French rugby for them to have him, and immediate impact too. As soon as he came on board, you could see the shape and structure and like work rate as well, go through the roof.
Yeah, No, and guys, I mean, I also heard it with guys who played under him at Wasps and Wales, but they want to play for him. So it's impressive, and his French has come on as well. So it's
Nice.
he's really got some buy-in from all the players.
That's cool. That's important. And what about the overall results? Great for a Wallabies fan, tough for a French rugby fan and employee. What do you think? Like two losses within, well, I think one by 2 points, the other by 3. What were some of the big learnings coming away from that for the team in terms of how that could have gone the other way?
I think we learned that we had a lot of depth, especially the younger guys, because we didn't have
a lot were back in France.
Yeah, we had the top 14 finals, and obviously with the 2-week quarantine, a lot of guys couldn't then fly over after the finals. So I think I suppose the level of the guys who came on that trip and came on that tour, there was a guy, the 15 Jaminet, he'd never even played top 14. He was playing Pro D2. And he was the revolution of the tour, basically. So I think that depth was definitely one positive learning, and then secondly, probably the resilience as well that they showed, because we had been in quarantine for 2 weeks. They had a season from hell with COVID, guys getting infected with COVID, and this was COVID at its peak. They had been playing in front of 0 fans, and suddenly they're coming and playing in front of packed stadiums. So we didn't know what kind of effect that would have on them, whether they'd be, overwhelmed by the crowds after a year of not playing in them. So being able to then come back in the second test and almost find ourselves in the same situation where, Australia get a penalty, 2 minutes to go, kick for touch, hit it up in the middle. We managed to get the turnover. The second test, it was Sekou Makalu. First test, Jonathan Dundee. And then I think it was almost a copycat. We could have kicked for touch like we did in the first, and then make a mess of the line out and ultimately lose it. But instead, second test, calmer heads, and having that learning experience from 5 days earlier, just a tap, create a ruck, and boom, kick it out.
Yeah.
Simpler way to go. First thing Sean said to me after, he's like, "Why didn't we do that in the first test?"
And that's, if people are going to look back at previous French teams, that is often the criticism, is that discipline, not just like the discipline with cards and things like that, but just the game management discipline as well. Yeah.
But I think, that ultimately was a learning experience. And I think you look at how they managed the game against New Zealand, and that was obviously going to be the ultimate test to see how they went. And no, it was really, really good.
Yeah, awesome. Moving on, what you're now into the Six Nations prep. What does that look like in terms of your role and the work that's required coming up?
There's obviously a heavy focus placed on analysis opposition, or opposition of analysis, I should say. I was saying that in French in my head.
Yeah.
But obviously big focus on that. Our games against them, and then their games against more recent opposition. And then trying to see what the content of sessions are going to be like, having to simplify the message. The big difference between club and national is the time that you get with the players.
Yeah.
So, simplicity is by far going to be your best lever to try and get information across, especially to guys who are coming into the environment for the first time. And these days they're big squads at under 20 level and at senior level. There's 40 odd guys coming in. So you need to be very precise in what you want to bring across on the field, and then off the field, maximize the time with your video sessions, with your tactical sessions, and your on-field sessions.
Yeah, and what are we expecting from the French this year?
I think if
I
they
want to
can
win, just quietly.
It's time.
A win would be good if they can, pick up where they left off against New Zealand. That'd be a good start. And then I suppose the challenge is to maintain that standard and back up a performance like that. 18 months out from the World Cup as well. I think it's going to be a pretty fascinating Six Nations Day.
Yeah,
because all England and Ireland are looking good, Scotland looking good. Italy got Kieran there now as well, and Wales as well had some surprising wins there in November. So
yeah, and lots of different styles of rugby too, just subtleties between each nation as well, which is always fascinating.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. All right. You just completed your masters as if you weren't doing enough. You just completed your master. You're making every other coach feel bad with the amount of work you do. But side note, you just completed your masters in coaching from Staffordshire University. From that experience, if you were to pass on a few kind of big rocks of key learnings to coaches, what would they be?
Well, just to your point, believe me, there were times when I wondered, what am I doing? Why did I sign up to do this? We were lucky we had quarantine for 2 weeks in Australia so I could finish off my thesis. That was
right.
I think one of my main learnings was doing my thesis because it was on coach development during COVID. So I was able to interview a whole range of coaches from grassroots all the way up to, international level, to see how they had learned and continued to develop as coaches throughout the lockdowns. And for me, that big learning was, as cliche as it sounds, it's you never stop learning as a coach. And again, Wayne Smith in your 100th said the same thing. I mean, the emphasis on learning is so big that I was able to see, yes, there may be different ways of learning, especially, with older coaches. They may not have the same approach as the younger ones, and those with more experience, seek information different ways to guys with less experience. But ultimately, it all comes down to continuing to learn, not just about the game, but how you coach. Whether it's taking it from other sports. And for me, that was an eye opener, because you may think that a guy at the top knows it all and isn't looking to continue getting better and continue learning, even if it's just simple things, but you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
And some of those guys are, looking just as much at the information that a grassroots coach are looking at. So that was probably my biggest takeaway, and just, whether it's reading podcasts, just having a chat with other people, there's a whole variety of ways we can learn. So, it was pretty much my main one.
Yeah, nice. And I also mentioned, I didn't mention it in the intro, but previous correspondence, you did the IRAN's high performance coaching course in New Zealand. That's right up there in terms of things for people to check off their coaching bucket list. What was that experience like?
Highly recommend it. I think for me that cemented the idea of sharing information and networking, because I met some great coaches on that course, guys from all over the world, coaching all kinds of levels. And then the course facilitators as well. We had Graham Henry there. We had John Plumtree there. So a lot of guys with experience. And if you're keen on your coaching, it's something that I'd definitely recommend. It's well worth the investment.
Yeah, and it's full immersion for a week and
experience. The high performance one was full immersion 2 weeks, and you start at 8, you finish at 8. You're in the boardroom, you're on the field, you're in the boardroom, out in the field, and it touches everything from leadership to nutrition to S&C to then the tactical elements of the game, how to create the environment as well. So it's that was big for me as well. Huge learnings there.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, it's been awesome chatting. So we're gonna hit the final 4 questions now. When you were a kid growing up in whatever hemisphere you were growing up in, who was some of the players that got you into rugby and got you excited about the game?
I as a back, I was quite keen on Chris Latham and Lottie Takiri.
Yeah, nice.
Also as a leaguey, but even though Lottie was a Queenslander, what can you do? But
and Latham.
and Latham.
Yep.
But yeah,
Two Queenslanders, mate. Trouble.
Yeah, but they obviously I think they had a big impact in the way Australia played in those early 2000s. It was sort of the era of big backs with Mortlock and Saylor. I think at the time I was a slightly bigger back as well, and so I could almost relate. I wasn't the quickest, or the most skilled, but I could almost assimilate, I suppose, to that kind of player.
So with your analyst hat on, would you say that in the 2003 final, Australia should have cross-field kicked all day to Lottie Takiri as opposed to just once?
100%. And I think that kind of tactic, you saw it with Falau as well. I think that kind of tactic can definitely come back as guys get more athletic, especially when you've got a mismatch like Takiri and Robinson.
Yeah. All right, nice one. What about now? Who are some of the players you like watching go around?
I like what Damien Dalendi does.
Yeah.
I think he's
a big back.
But he's a threat on all surfaces. He can kick, he can step, he can pass. He's a triple threat kind of play. And then Peter Aki as well at Toulouse.
Yeah.
A guy who sort of flies a little bit under the radar, but those two guys, those kind of players put bums on seats when they play, and I think that's what rugby needs as well, especially at the moment. Because you've got your superstars as well that do that, but I think those two guys who can light up a moment in a match, I think they're pretty exciting to watch.
Yeah, totally agree. And what about coaches? Who are some of the high-profile coaches that you respect what they're doing?
Obviously, I have to mention Sean just because of the impact he's had on me in the last few months, and how much I've picked his brain. There's a ton of them out there. Even from other coaches, Trent Robinson, I like what he's doing, and I'd be fascinated to have a chat with him at some point. It was interesting actually working with Freddie Mishlak with Monaco, because he'd been the assistant coach at the Roosters, doing the skills for the last year or two. So it was almost like I was picking Trent Robinson's brain through Freddie Mishlak as to what kind of things they're doing in league and how they work. So no, that was pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, cool. All right, and final question: what about someone in the grassroots who's doing good work and deserves some recognition?
In Luxembourg, there's John Flynn. I think he's the coach I spoke about earlier, who I coach with at national level, and he's also one of the coaches at the club. I think he's doing some good work. He's been here for a while. You
call him Flinny?
I don't actually.
Oh, you don't?
I probably should. Probably will now.
Good. All right.
Flinny, if you're listening, mate. And then over in Paris, I think not exactly grassroots, but up and coming coaches, Kobus Potgieter. He coached Germany, and he's now working with the pros this season, and I think he's got a great way of looking at the game. He's very, very detailed. And same another one would be Romain Carmignani, who's the assistant coach at La Rochelle, guy who I worked with at under 20s. But both coaches who are super open, very, very keen to learn. They've done a lot of professional development. So I think those coaches it shows straight away if they're open and if they're guys who think they know it all already. But I think those guys definitely, all three of them, deserve some recognition because they are guys who put themselves out there, out of their own pocket. They'll pay to go and across the world to spend some time with the team. So that's awesome. I think that's goes back to networking, as we mentioned.
100%. All right, James, it's been awesome catching up, mate, and chatting. about your time over in Europe, and especially with the French team, and really looking forward to how the Six Nation rolls out. And I'll be supporting France. I've got that's my dog in the fight, and can't wait to see how it goes.
Thanks very much, Andy. Pleasure to be on. Thanks, mate.
Yeah.
All the best.
Cheers, mate. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us via Twitter at Rugby Coaches CNR or via the website therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.